My name is Maynard. I'm 32 years old, and I've been secretly paying my parents' mortgage for 6 years. They had no idea their house actually belonged to me until last month when my mother screamed at me to get out and never come back. So I did exactly that, and I stopped paying their mortgage too. 3 weeks later, my dad showed up at my office, confused about why the bank was threatening foreclosure. The look on his face when I told him the truth was something I'll never forget. Before I tell you how that confrontation went down, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and stick around to hear how standing up for yourself can change family dynamics forever. I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in suburban Michigan. From the outside, we probably looked like a normal family, but behind closed doors, it was a different story. My mother Nancy was the kind of woman who needed absolute control over everything and everyone in her orbit. My father Robert was her perfect counterpart, passive to a fault and unwilling to challenge her on anything even when she was clearly wrong. As their only daughter, I became the focus of my mother's controlling behavior. Nothing I did was ever good enough. If I got an A-, she wanted to know why it wasn't an A+. If my room was clean, she'd find the one spot of dust I missed. If I came home at 8:59 when curfew was 9, I'd get lectured about cutting it too close. The worst part was her temper. Mom would explode over the smallest things, and her favorite threat was kicking me out. The first time it happened, I was 13. I had borrowed her hairdryer without asking and forgotten to put it back. She found me in my room doing homework and completely lost it. Get out of my house right now," she screamed, her face turning that particular shade of red I came to dread. I remember sitting there, frozen tears streaming down my face, having no idea where I was supposed to go. I was a child. After about an hour of me sitting on the front porch crying, she opened the door and acted like nothing had happened. This became a pattern throughout my teenage years. When I was 15, she kicked me out for talking back. At 16, it was for coming home 20 minutes late. At 17, it was for not immediately answering when she called me. Each time, I'd be forced to leave with no warning, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in the rain or snow. I'd walk to the local library or mall, or if it was late, I'd just sit in the neighborhood playground until she calmed down and allowed me back. My father never stood up to her during these episodes. He'd watch silently as she screamed at me to get out. Sometimes I'd catch his eye silently pleading for help, but he'd look away. Later, he'd find ways to comfort me privately. He'd slip me extra allowance money or bring me my favorite ice cream. Once, after a particularly bad fight when I was 16, he whispered, "Just a few more years, kiddo. Then you can live your own life." I took those words to heart. I started working at 15, taking any job I could find. I worked at the local grocery store after school and picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop. During summers, I added a third job mowing lawns in our neighborhood. I saved every penny I could, hiding the money in a lockbox under a loose floorboard in my closet. My mother would have considered it her money if she'd known about it. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved nearly $8,000. I had also managed to secure a partial scholarship to a state university 3 hours away. The day after graduation, I packed everything that mattered to me and left. I told my parents I was moving into the dorms early for a special program. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had arranged to start work as a resident assistant, which provided free housing during the summer before classes started. College was my first taste of freedom, and I thrived. I limited my calls home to once a week, always making sure to call when I knew my father would answer. I came home for major holidays, but always had an excuse to leave early. I studied business with a focus on real estate investment, fascinated by the idea of building financial security through property. During my college years, I kept working multiple jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I interned at a real estate investment firm during my junior and senior years, which led to a job offer upon graduation. By 22, I was working as a junior analyst at a property investment group, learning everything I could about the market. I kept my relationship with my parents, distant but cordial. My father and I developed a habit of meeting for lunch once a month without my mother. During these lunches, I'd see glimpses of the man he might have been if he hadn't spent decades under my mother's thumb. He was funny, insightful, and genuinely interested in my life. But whenever the conversation turned to my mother or their relationship, his expression would shudder and he'd change the subject. By 26, I had built a modest but growing portfolio of investment properties. I had started with a small rundown condo that I renovated on weekends and eventually sold for a $15,000 profit. That money went into 2 more properties and so on. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was financially stable and building towards something bigger. Then came the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and I was reviewing potential properties when my phone rang. It was my father, which was unusual. Our lunches were always arranged via text, and he rarely called out of the blue. "Maynard." His voice was shaking. "I need to talk to you about something important, but you can't tell your mother I called." That phone call changed everything. My father was in tears, something I had never heard before. Between sobs, he explained that they were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments and facing foreclosure. The bank had sent a final notice, and they had less than 30 days to come up with nearly $12,000 or lose the house. "Your mother doesn't want me to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She says we'll figure it out ourselves, but Maynard, I don't know what to do. I've been looking for a second job, but at my age, no one's hiring. Your mother refuses to work. Retail or food service says it's beneath her." I wasn't entirely surprised. My father had worked at the same manufacturing company for 30 years, but his salary had barely increased over the last decade. My mother had bounced between administrative jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to advance. She always had a reason for quitting, usually something about her boss not appreciating her work or coworkers being against her. What did surprise me was that they were about to lose their house. It was the one thing my mother had always been proud of. She kept it immaculate and was constantly making small improvements to keep up with neighborhood trends. The thought of her losing it made me strangely sad. Despite our difficult relationship, "I can help," I told my father. "I have some savings." This was true, though not the whole truth. I had recently liquidated one of my investment properties and was sitting on a significant amount of cash waiting for the right opportunity. "No, no," he protested immediately. "Your mother would never accept money from you. She's too proud. That's why I wasn't supposed to tell you." "What if she doesn't have to know it's from me?" I asked, an idea forming. Over the next few days, I developed a plan. I contacted the bank holding my parents' mortgage and, positioning myself as a real estate investor, inquired about purchasing the property pre-foreclosure. The bank was amenable, especially when I offered to pay off the outstanding balance and take over the loan. Next, I spoke with my father about the details. The house had originally cost $180,000 25 years ago. They had refinanced several times, often taking equity out for various expenses, and still owed nearly $150,000 despite having paid on it for decades. The monthly payment was $1,200, which they had managed until my father's hours were cut back the previous year. My plan was simple but required my father's cooperation. I would buy the house from the bank and become the legal owner. My parents would continue living there, making payments to me instead of the bank, but at a reduced rate of $800 per month, which they could afford. They would believe they were still paying off their mortgage, just at a renegotiated rate. In reality, I would be covering the difference, and the house would legally be mine. "I don't know, Maynard." My father hesitated. "It feels like lying to your mother. Would you rather tell her the truth and lose the house?" I asked. "This way, you keep your home, and she never needs to know about the financial trouble. The bank will send you papers about a loan modification. Just tell her you negotiated a better rate." Eventually, he agreed. We set up a special account where they would deposit their mortgage payment each month. The real mortgage would be paid from my personal account automatically. The plan worked perfectly. My mother believed they had narrowly avoided foreclosure thanks to my father's negotiating skills. Something she grudgingly admitted impressed her. My father and I were the only ones who knew the truth along with my lawyer and accountant. For the next 6 years, I paid the difference on their mortgage without complaint. It wasn't a small amount, $400 every month, plus the occasional property tax bill and insurance premium. Over time, it added up to more than $30,000 that my parents never knew I contributed to their housing. But money wasn't the biggest cost. The real price was maintaining the secret and the strange power dynamic it created. I legally owned the house where my mother continued to treat me like an unwelcome guest. Each time she criticized my clothes, my career choices, or my personal life during family dinners, I would bite my tongue thinking about the check I had just written for her property taxes. My father and I never discussed the arrangement during our regular lunches. It was as if we had both decided that acknowledging it would somehow break the spell. But sometimes, when my mother was particularly harsh with him, I would catch him looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and shame that made my heart ache. As the years passed, I found myself growing more resentful. Not of the money exactly, but of the fact that I was financially supporting people who didn't fully respect me, particularly my mother. I was an adult woman with a successful career, making significant financial decisions and growing my investment portfolio. Yet, in my mother's eyes, I was still the disappointing daughter who couldn't do anything right. By the time I reached 32, I had invested over $180,000 in my parents' housing, counting the initial payment to stop the foreclosure and the ongoing monthly contributions. I had also built my own real estate business, transitioning from working for others to managing my own investment company. I owned 12 properties outright and had partial ownership in several larger developments. All this success, and yet every time I visited my parents' home, I reverted to feeling like that scared teenager sitting on the front porch waiting to be allowed back inside. I knew it wasn't healthy, but breaking free of family dynamics is never simple, especially when complicated by secret financial entanglements. In retrospect, I should have known it would all come crashing down eventually. No secret stays buried forever, especially not one wrapped in decades of unresolved emotional trauma. It was a Sunday evening in April, when everything finally imploded. I had agreed to come to dinner at my parents' house, something I did about once a month, out of a sense of obligation more than desire. These dinners usually followed a predictable pattern. My mother would cook something elaborate to show off her skills. My father would make awkward small talk to fill the silence. And I would answer questions about my work and life, with as little detail as possible to avoid criticism. This particular Sunday seemed no different at first. My mother had prepared her signature pot roast with roasted potatoes and vegetables. The table was set with the good china they only used for special occasions and guests. I brought an expensive bottle of wine which my mother accepted with a slight nod that was as close to approval as she ever showed. Dinner began normally enough. We discussed the unusually warm spring weather, my father's upcoming fishing trip with his brother, and my mother's latest gardening project. Then, inevitably, my mother turned her attention to me. "So, Maynard," she said, cutting her meat with precise movements, still working all the time. "No wonder you can't find a man, you're never available." I took a sip of wine before responding. My work keeps me busy, but I enjoy it. And I date when I meet someone interesting. At your age, I was already married with a house and a child, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. Your biological clock isn't getting any younger. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Nancy Maynard is doing very well for herself. Not everyone follows the same path. My mother ignored him. And what are you wearing these days? Those pants look like something a college student would wear. Don't they have dress codes at your office? I looked down at my tailored slacks, which had cost more than most of her entire wardrobe. I own the company, Mom. I make the dress code. Well, it doesn't look professional to me, she sniffed. And your hair. When are you going to do something with it? You look so plain. Each comment was like a tiny paper cut, not fatal on its own, but painful in accumulation. Normally, I would let them slide, finish my dinner quickly, and make an excuse to leave. But something was different that night. Maybe it was the glass of wine, or maybe it was the culmination of years of suppressed frustration. But I felt my patience snap like a dry twig. Do you ever have anything positive to say to me? I asked, setting down my fork, with more force than necessary. Anything at all. My mother looked startled. I rarely pushed back against her criticism. I'm just trying to help you improve yourself. That's what mothers do. No, Mom. That's not what mothers do. Mothers support their children. They don't constantly tear them down. Don't be so sensitive, she said dismissively. If you can't take a little constructive criticism, I laughed without humor. There's nothing constructive about telling me I look plain, or that my career choices are wrong, or that I'm failing because I'm not married with children. Well, excuse me for caring about your future, she said, her voice rising. Some daughters would appreciate a mother who pays attention. I was fully engaged now. Years of hurt, bubbling to the surface. You've never paid attention to who I actually am, or what I actually want. You've only ever seen the ways I don't match your perfect image of what a daughter should be. My father's eyes were darting between us, his expression increasingly alarmed. Ladies, please, let's just enjoy our dinner. But we were beyond that point now. My mother's face had taken on the flushed, tight look that had always preceded her worst outbursts. After everything we've done for you, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. All the sacrifices we made. And this is the gratitude we get. What sacrifices exactly? I asked. You provided the basic necessities, yes. But you also kicked me out of the house repeatedly as a teenager for minor infractions. Do you have any idea how that affected me? How it still affects me? Oh, here we go again with the past. You always exaggerate everything. I never kicked you out. You did. Dozens of times, Dad tell her. I looked at my father, silently pleading for him to finally acknowledge the truth. He looked down at his plate. Nancy, you did get very angry sometimes. So you're taking her side now. My mother turned on him, and he immediately retreated. I'm not taking sides. I just think we all remember things differently. His diplomatic non-answer infuriated me more than if he'd openly disagreed. After all these years, after everything I'd done for them, he still couldn't stand up to her, not even to acknowledge the truth. This is pointless, I said, pushing back from the table. You've never been able to admit when you're wrong, Mom. And Dad, you've never been brave enough to call her on it. How dare you speak to us that way in our own home, my mother shouted, now fully enraged. The word "our" triggered something in me. The irony was too much a bitter pill I couldn't swallow silently. Is it really your home, though? I said the words, escaping before I could stop them. My mother's eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? I caught myself just in time. Revealing the mortgage arrangement in anger would solve nothing and only cause more drama. I took a deep breath. Nothing. I should go. Yes, you should, my mother said, standing up. Her voice had taken on the cold, brittle quality I remembered from my childhood, right before she would order me out. In fact, why don't you get out and never come back? We don't need your judgment or your condescension. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything to diffuse the situation. He met my eyes briefly, then looked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. In that moment, something broke inside me, a final thread of hope that things could ever change. I stood up, slowly placed my napkin on the table, and walked to the door without another word. "Did you hear me, Maynard?" My mother called after me. I said, "Don't come back." I paused at the door, turned and looked directly at my father. "Is that what you want too, Dad?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then stared at his hands. His silence was answer enough. I walked out, got into my car, and drove away with tears streaming down my face. But these weren't tears of sadness or hurt. They were tears of release of a decision finally made after years of ambivalence. That night, I logged into my banking app and canceled the automatic mortgage payment for my parents' house. Then I called my lawyer and asked him to prepare the necessary paperwork for a formal eviction process should it become necessary. If they wanted me gone from their lives, I would be gone completely, including my financial support. It was time they understood exactly what that meant. The 3 weeks following that Sunday dinner were the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. For the first time since college, I didn't have the weight of my parents' expectations and judgments hanging over me. I didn't have to plan my schedule around obligatory visits or brace myself for critical phone calls. Initially, I struggled with guilt about canceling the mortgage payment. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, wondering if I was being petty or vindictive. But then I'd remember my mother's words, "Get out and never come back," and my father's damning silence, and the guilt would recede. After the first week of silence, I made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Lisa Brennan specialized in family trauma, and our first session was eye-opening. "What you're describing sounds like a pattern of emotional abuse," she told me, after I recounted my childhood experiences. The repeated threats of abandonment, the constant criticism, the withholding of approval, these are all classic signs. "But she never hit me," I said, voicing the doubt that had minimized my experiences for years. "Emotional abuse leaves scars too, just not visible ones," Dr. Brennan explained. "And your father's passive enabling allowed it to continue. His failure to protect you was also a form of neglect." We discussed my decision to stop paying the mortgage, which I was still conflicted about. "You're not obligated to financially support people who treat you poorly, even if they're family," she said. "In fact, it sounds like the financial arrangement may have been perpetuating an unhealthy dynamic." After our session, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and validation. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the full extent of the damage my upbringing had caused, the ways it had shaped my relationships and my approach to conflict. I committed to weekly therapy sessions, determined to break the patterns I had unconsciously carried into adulthood. During the second week, I reached out to my brother Thomas, with whom I'd had limited contact over the years. 5 years younger than me, he had left home at 18 for the military. Partly I suspected to escape the same toxic environment. We had never been close, our age gap and our different strategies for coping with our mother, creating a distance between us. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning. Thomas looked good, more at peace than I remembered him. He had finished his service, gone to college on the GI Bill, and now worked as an engineer in a neighboring state. He had a serious girlfriend and was thinking about proposing. "I haven't been back to see them in almost a year," he admitted when I brought up our parents. "Mom always finds a way to make me feel like I'm still the screw-up kid who couldn't do anything right." "Did she ever kick you out?" I asked, curious if her treatment of him had mirrored mine. "Not like she did with you," he said, surprising me with his awareness. "I remember those nights you'd disappear. I was young, but I knew something was wrong. Dad would tell me you were staying at a friend's house, but sometimes I'd see you sitting at the playground down the street." His words brought tears to my eyes. All those years I'd thought no one had noticed or cared. Once he continued, "When I was about 13, I asked Mom why she was so hard on you. She said it was because you were too much like her, stubborn and proud, and she was trying to break you of those traits before they ruined your life like they had hers." The insight was jarring. I had never considered that my mother might see herself in me, that her criticism might stem from her own self-loathing. "That doesn't excuse it," Thomas added quickly, seeing my expression. "It just might explain some of it." We spent hours talking, filling in the gaps of our separate but parallel experiences growing up in that house. By the time we parted, we had promised to stay in better touch to try to be the family for each other that our parents had failed to be. It was during the third week that the bank's automated system sent out the first missed payment notice to my parents. I knew this because my father started calling, first once, then twice, then 5 times in a single day. I let each call go to voicemail, not ready to have that conversation yet. His messages started calm, but grew increasingly desperate. "Maynard, it's Dad. Could you call me back when you get a chance? It's important. Maynard, please call me. We need to discuss something about the house. Maynard, the bank says we're late on our mortgage. There must be some mistake. Call me as soon as you can. Maynard, this is serious. We got a letter about possible foreclosure. Please call me back. Maynard, I don't know if you're getting these messages, but I really need to talk to you. Your mother doesn't know about this yet, and I'm trying to figure it out before she finds out." I listened to each message with a growing sense of resolve. This was the conversation we needed to have, but I wanted it to happen on my terms, not in a panicked phone call, where my father would be focused on damage control rather than truth. I consulted with my therapist about the best approach. If you decide to tell them the truth, she advised, do it in a neutral location. Be clear about your boundaries moving forward, and prepare yourself for their reactions, which may include anger, denial, or attempts to make you feel guilty. I was just beginning to formulate a plan for meeting with my father when he forced my hand. On Thursday afternoon, my assistant buzzed my office. "Maynard, there's a Robert Johnson here to see you. He says he's your father, and it's urgent." My heart pounded as I told her to send him in. I hadn't expected him to come to my workplace, and the fact that he had indicated just how desperate he was becoming. When my father walked into my office, I barely recognized him. In just 3 weeks, he seemed to have aged years. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, his eyes shadowed by dark circles, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a physical weight. "Maynard," he said, his voice breaking. "What's going on with the mortgage? The bank says we're behind, but I know we made the payment. Your mother will lose her mind if she finds out." Looking at him, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, compassion, frustration, and determination. After a moment's consideration, I made a decision. "Dad, we need to talk, but not here. Meet me at Riverside Cafe in an hour. Just you, not Mom." He nodded, eagerly relief, washing over his face at the prospect of resolving the situation. "Thank you, Maynard. I knew you'd help us sort this out." As he left, I wondered if he had any idea what was really coming. Riverside Cafe was busy, but not crowded, when I arrived exactly as I had hoped. I chose a table in the corner away from other patrons where we could have privacy without the echoing emptiness of a deserted restaurant. I ordered a black coffee and waited, rehearsing what I would say in my mind. My father arrived 5 minutes early. Another sign of his anxiety. He spotted me immediately and hurried over, sliding into the chair across from me, with none of his usual careful movements. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, not even bothering to order a drink. "I've been trying to make sense of this situation. The bank says we missed last month's payment, and when I checked our account, the automatic transfer didn't go through." I took a sip of my coffee, buying myself a moment. "It didn't go through because I canceled it." His face registered confusion. "You? What? What do you mean? You canceled it? How could you cancel our mortgage payment?" "Because it's my mortgage, Dad, not yours." The color drained from his face. "I don't understand. 6 years ago, when you called me about the foreclosure, I didn't just help you negotiate a lower payment. I bought the house. I've been paying the difference between what you give me and the actual mortgage amount every month since then." He stared at me in disbelief. "That's not possible. We send $800 to the special account every month." "Yes, to an account I set up. The real mortgage is $1,200. I pay the extra $400 plus all the property taxes and insurance. But the papers we signed, the bank said it was a loan modification. I shook my head. You signed ownership transfer documents. I have copies if you want to see them. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, his expression moving from confusion to something darker. You've been lying to us for 6 years, making us think we still owned our home when we didn't. I hadn't expected him to focus on deception rather than gratitude, and it stung. I did what you asked me to do, Dad. I helped you keep the house. Without Mom knowing where the money came from, would you have preferred? I let the bank take it. Of course not, but... He trailed off then. His eyes narrowed. Is this because of what happened at dinner? You're punishing us by threatening our home. I'm not threatening anything. I'm simply no longer paying for a house that I'm not welcome in. My voice was calm, but firm. Mom told me to get out and never come back. You sat there and said nothing, so I left. And I stopped paying for a house that apparently isn't mine to enter. Maynard, you know how your mother gets. She didn't mean it literally, didn't she? She's been kicking me out since I was 13 years old, Dad. Each time you let it happen. Each time I was expected to come crawling back and pretend everything was fine. He had the grace to look ashamed at that. We've had our problems, but we're still family. Family doesn't treat each other the way Mom treats me. And family doesn't silently watch it happen the way you do. I pulled out a folder containing copies of the property documents and placed it on the table between us. Here's proof of everything I've told you. The deed, the mortgage statements, the payment records. Over the past 6 years, I've put more than $180,000 into that house. He flipped through the papers, his hands trembling slightly. I could see the moment reality fully hit him, his shoulders sagging with the weight of it. What are you going to do? He asked. Finally, his voice small. That depends on you and Mom. I'm willing to continue the arrangement we've had, but only if some things change. Before I could elaborate, his phone rang. He glanced at it and grimaced. It's your mother. Are you going to tell her you're meeting with me? He hesitated, then answered the phone. Hi, honey. Yes, I'm just running some errands. No, I shouldn't be much longer. Yes, I'll pick that up on the way home. The ease with which he lied to her was both disturbing and sad. It spoke volumes about their relationship, about the coping mechanisms he had developed over decades of marriage to a controlling woman. After hanging up, he looked at me apologetically. I'll tell her everything soon, I promise. I just need to figure out the right way. Dad, this is exactly the problem. You've spent my entire life avoiding difficult conversations with Mom, tiptoeing around her moods, making excuses for her behavior. It's not healthy for you. And it wasn't healthy for me growing up. He flinched, as if I'd struck him. I've always tried to keep the peace. Peace. At what cost? Do you know what it did to me as a child? To have no one defend me. To watch my father stand by silently, while my mother told me I was worthless, that I should get out of her house. I never thought you were worthless, he protested weakly. But you never said that when it mattered. Your silence felt like agreement. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, years of unspoken hurt hanging between us. Finally, my father spoke again. What do you want from us, Maynard? I had given this question a lot of thought over the past 3 weeks. What did I want? Initially, in the raw aftermath of that final dinner, I had fantasized about revenge, about my parents finally understanding what it felt like to be thrown out of their home the way I had been repeatedly thrown out as a child. But therapy and reflection had tempered those emotions. I want 3 things, I said, my voice steady. First, I want Mom to agree to family therapy. Not just one session for show, but a real commitment to working through our issues with a professional. My father's eyebrows rose. Your mother would never agree to therapy. She doesn't believe in it. That's the first condition, I repeated firmly. Second, I want you to stop enabling her behavior. When she's wrong, especially when she's hurtful to me or Thomas, I need you to say something. He shifted uncomfortably. You don't understand what it's like living with her day in and day out. You're right, I don't. But I do understand what it's like to be a child with no advocate, no protector. And I'm not willing to continue that dynamic as an adult. He nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. And the third thing, I want both of you to acknowledge the reality of our situation. I own the house. I've been supporting you financially for years. I'm not asking for gratitude or repayment, but I am asking for basic respect. And if we agree to these conditions, then I'll continue paying the mortgage. I'll even transfer the house back into your names as a gift once we've made progress in therapy. But if things don't change, I'm done. I'll sell the house you'll need to find somewhere else to live, and we can go our separate ways. My father ran his hands over his face, looking suddenly every one of his 65 years. You're asking a lot, Maynard. I'm asking for what I should have had all along. A mother who doesn't emotionally abuse me and a father who protects me from harm. It's actually the bare minimum. Your mother won't see it that way. Then help her see it, I said, leaning forward. For once in your life, Dad, stand up to her, not just for my sake, but for yours too. Don't you want a better relationship with both your children? Don't you want a more peaceful home life? He stared at his hands for a long moment. I do want those things. I just don't know if they're possible with your mother. They won't be if you don't try. And if they truly aren't possible, then maybe it's time to ask yourself some hard questions about the life you want for your remaining years. That struck a nerve. I could see it in the way his eyes widened slightly, the way he swallowed hard. It had perhaps never occurred to him that he had options beyond enduring my mother's behavior until death parted them. I need time to think, he said finally, and to figure out how to approach your mother. I understand. But I can't wait indefinitely. The next mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll move forward with the eviction process. Eviction. The word seemed to physically pain him. You would really throw your own parents out on the street. I would really stop subsidizing a toxic relationship, yes. I've spent 6 years, and more money than I care, to calculate trying to help you both while accepting emotional abuse in return. I'm not doing it anymore. He looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in my expression must have convinced him of my resolve. 2 weeks, he repeated. What exactly do you need from us by then? A commitment to try. Mom needs to agree to therapy. You need to agree to speak up, and you both need to acknowledge the financial reality. We can work out the details after that, but those are my non-negotiables. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to her. Will you? Really talk to her, not hint around the edges, and then back down at the first sign of resistance. I'll do my best, Maynard. I wanted to believe him, but history made me skeptical. Still, the ball was in his court now. Call me when you've decided, I said, standing up to signal the end of our meeting. Not before. I need a real answer. Not just an attempt to buy more time. As he rose to leave, he hesitated, then asked, Does Thomas know about all this? About the house number? About Mom's treatment of me and your silence? Yes, we've discussed it. Is that why he barely visits or calls anymore? The question was so lacking in self-awareness that I almost laughed. Yes, Dad. That's exactly why. Neither of your children wants to spend time with people who make them feel inadequate and unwelcome. He flinched, then nodded once more before turning to leave. I watched him walk away, his shoulders slumped, his gait unsteady. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt for putting him in this position. Then, I reminded myself that I hadn't created this situation. I had simply stopped pretending it was acceptable. As I paid for my coffee and headed back to my office, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in my adult life, I had set clear boundaries with my parents. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done what was necessary for my own well-being. The 2 weeks that followed were surprisingly peaceful. My father didn't call or text, which I took as a sign that he was taking my ultimatum seriously rather than trying to negotiate or delay. I continued my therapy sessions, spent time with friends who had been neglected during years of family drama, and even went on a promising first date with a man I met through a business connection. By the time the 2-week deadline arrived, I had made peace with either outcome. If my parents agreed to my conditions, we would begin the hard but necessary work of healing our family. If they didn't, I would proceed with the eviction and finally close that chapter of my life. Either way, I would no longer be the silent supporter of my own mistreatment. And that realization alone made me feel freer than I had in years. The 2-week deadline came and went, with no word from either of my parents. Despite my mental preparation, their silence still hurt. I had offered a path to reconciliation, and they had apparently chosen to reject it. The next morning, I called my lawyer and instructed him to begin the formal eviction process. It will take about 30 days, he explained. They'll receive official notice and then have an opportunity to respond. Given that you have clear documentation of ownership, it should be straightforward but emotionally challenging given the relationship. I understand, I said, my voice steady, despite the heaviness in my chest. Proceed, as needed. For the next 29 days, I immersed myself in work therapy and rebuilding connections with friends and my brother. Thomas and I spoke weekly now, our conversations growing easier and more meaningful with each call. He was supportive of my decision, though I could tell he harbored some guilt about not being more present during the years I had shouldered the burden of our parents alone. You did what you thought was right at the time, I assured him during one call. We both did. We were just kids trying to survive a difficult situation. The evening before the eviction papers were to be served, I was working late in my home office when my doorbell rang. It was nearly 9 o'clock and I wasn't expecting anyone. Checking the security camera, I was shocked to see both my parents standing on my porch. My mother looked nothing like her usual put-together self. Her hair was unstyled, her face free of makeup, her posture lacking its typical rigid confidence. My father stood beside her, one hand on her elbow, as if providing physical support. For a moment I considered not answering. Then, taking a deep breath, I went to the door and opened it. "Maynard," my mother said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "May we come in?" I hesitated, then stepped back, allowing them into my living room. They sat together on the sofa, while I took the armchair across from them, maintaining physical and emotional distance. "Your father told me everything," my mother began without preamble. "About the house. About the money you've been paying. About the things you said at the cafe." I remained silent, watching her carefully, waiting to see where this was going. "My first reaction was anger," she continued. "I felt betrayed, lied to. But then as the days passed, and I thought about everything, really thought about it, I started to see things differently." She paused, seeming to struggle with what came next. My father reached over and took her hand. "It's okay, Nancy," he said gently. "Tell her what you told me." My mother took a shaky breath. "I realized that I've been a terrible mother to you." Of all the things I had expected her to say, this wasn't even on the list. I stared at her, speechless. "The way I treated you growing up was wrong," she continued, tears forming in her eyes. "Kicking you out, criticizing everything you did, making you feel unwanted in your own home. I was repeating what my own mother did to me, and I never stopped to consider how it was affecting you." I had never heard my mother admit fault before, not once in my entire life. The shock must have shown on my face because she gave a sad smile. I know it's hard to believe. I've spent the past 2 weeks looking back at our relationship at all the times I hurt you when I should have supported you. And then to learn that, despite all that you've been financially supporting us for years. Her voice broke. I don't deserve your help or your forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to try to make things right. We both are, my father added. I've been a coward, Maynard. I failed to protect you when you needed me most. I chose peace over doing what was right, and you suffered for it. I'm so sorry. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. After a lifetime of emotional abuse followed by denial, my mother was actually acknowledging her behavior and apologizing. It seemed almost too good to be true. What changed? I finally asked. Why now, after all these years? The thought of losing our home was a wake-up call, my mother admitted. But more than that, it was realizing that we've already lost something far more valuable. Our relationship with you. And with Thomas. We've agreed to your conditions, my father said. All of them. We've already contacted a family therapist and scheduled our first session for next week. We'd like you to join us if you're willing. And I'm going to start individual therapy too, my mother added. There are things I need to work through from my own childhood that I've never dealt with properly. I felt tears welling in my eyes. I don't know what to say. I've wanted to hear these words for so long, but I'm afraid to believe them. You don't have to decide right now, my father said, and you don't have to trust us immediately. We know we need to earn that trust back. We understand if you still want to go through with the eviction, my mother said, surprising me again. We've started looking at apartments just in case. I shook my head. That won't be necessary. As long as you're genuinely committed to making changes, I'll continue the current arrangement. Thank you, they said in unison. But I need you to understand something, I continued firmly. This is your last chance. If we start therapy and either of you quit, or if the old patterns resume, that's it. I'll walk away for good. And the financial support will end too. We understand, my father said solemnly. And one more thing, I added. I want Thomas included in the family therapy sessions, at least some of them. He deserves healing too. My mother nodded. I've already called him to apologize. We spoke for nearly 2 hours. It was the first real conversation we've had in years. As they prepared to leave, my mother hesitated at the door, then turned back to me. The house, she said softly. You mentioned possibly transferring it back to us eventually. Please don't. Keep it. It's the least we owe you, after everything. With that, they left, leaving me in a state of emotional turmoil. Part of me was cautiously hopeful, while another part remained skeptical, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I called Thomas immediately to confirm my parents' story. It's true, he said, sounding as surprised as I felt. Mom called me 3 days ago, crying and apologizing for everything. I've never heard her like that. Do you think it's genuine? He paused. I think so. People can change when they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. And Dad said they almost lost the house. That was the catalyst, yes. Sometimes it takes losing something important to realize what really matters, he said thoughtfully. Over the next 6 months, we attended weekly family therapy sessions with Dr. Karen Mendez, a specialist in family trauma and reconciliation. The first few sessions were awkward and painful, with old hurts being dragged into the light for examination. There were tears, raised voices, and moments when I was certain the whole effort was futile. But gradually, incrementally, things began to change. My mother learned to recognize her triggers and stop herself before falling into old patterns. My father found his voice gently but firmly calling out inappropriate behavior when it occurred. I learned to set healthy boundaries while still remaining open to healing. 3 months in, I transferred the house deed to both their names as a gift. Not because they had asked, but because I wanted our relationship to be based on emotional connection rather than financial obligation. They were stunned by the gesture, and it seemed to deepen their commitment to the therapy process. "We can't possibly repay you," my father said when I handed them the papers. "I don't want repayment," I told them honestly. "I just want a healthy family." It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were setbacks days when my mother would slip into criticism or my father would revert to passive silence. But now, we had tools to address these moments, to name them and correct course, rather than letting resentment build. By the 1-year mark, our relationship had transformed in ways I never thought possible. We could spend time together without walking on eggshells. We could disagree without it escalating into personal attacks. We could express love without conditions attached. Thomas noticed the change too. "I actually look forward to calling them now," he told me during one of our regular catch-ups. "It's like having the parents we always should have had." The journey taught me that standing up for yourself doesn't mean giving up on relationships that matter. Sometimes, it's exactly what those relationships need to evolve into something healthier. My mother needed to face the consequences of her behavior to find the motivation to change. My father needed to see that enabling wasn't the same as loving. And I needed to value myself enough to demand better treatment. True family isn't about obligation or blood ties. It's about mutual respect, genuine care, and the willingness to grow together through difficulties. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful connections, if we're brave enough to have them. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Did it lead to positive change or difficult decisions? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content about navigating complex family dynamics. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's often the first step toward healing relationships that matter. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage in your own journey toward healthier connections.